to start recording.
So who's here?
And right now we have 10, but people straggling.
A minion? You hear? There's the clock.
Hey. Am I accurate or am I accurate? There you go.
Yeah.
Ring into the chimes.
At least by that 100-year-old clock, 120-year-old clock. So
Start recording.
So who's here?
And right now we have 10, but people straggling.
A minion? You hear?
Is that
There's the clock.
10? Is that 10 with Stu and I?
I'm hearing it.
There you go.
Yeah.
Ring into the chimes.
I'm hearing an echo.
By that 100-year-old
Strong
clock,
echo.
120-year-old clock. So
Is anyone else hearing it?
who's here?
And if you need, there are 3 here, Carl.
People straggling.
Is that 10? Is that 10 with Stu and I?
I'm hearing it.
Well, why don't you mute?
The delay.
100-year-old clock. 120-year-old clock. So
It is a delay. It's a big delay.
It's a delay on YouTube for live stream, but don't worry about it. Just come back to Zoom. Turn off the YouTube and come back to Zoom.
10 with Stu and I?
why don't you
It is a delay. It's a big delay.
Rabbi, are you on? Get off of YouTube.
Why don't you put yourself on mute?
Get off the YouTube and come back. For YouTube, get back to Zoom. Come back to Zoom. Leave YouTube for the peasants. You're on YouTube. Stay on YouTube. For YouTube, get back to Zoom. Come back to Zoom. Leave YouTube for the peasants.
Okay. Ira, who are you talking to? Are you talking to me?
You. Yes.
I'm on YouTube?
Well, you had YouTube up, and that's what was causing.
No, I never went onto YouTube.
So somebody has YouTube on. Hey, wait a minute.
You're talking to me?
Yes.
I'm on YouTube?
Well, you had YouTube up, and that's what was causing.
No, I never went onto YouTube.
Okay, wait a minute.
There's a question about being on YouTube. If everyone shuts down and relogs in onto Zoom, that should get rid of it.
But YouTube isn't even interactive with this. I mean, people who are on YouTube and we don't know it.
Somebody has something up
Okay,
in the
so
background.
I'm gonna talk briefly here. Rabbi, you have the floor. I'm gonna put myself on mute, and you just tell me what you want at this point.
Oh, well, okay, yeah, because you're going to be you have the screen share, right? But I don't need it just yet. I just want to say first of all, welcome, Shana Tova. I'm going to start by singing a song. Al Shlosha Devarim, Al Shlosha Devarim, Al Shlosha Devarim, Ha'olam Omed, Al Shlosha Devarim, Al Shlosha Devarim, Al shlosha devarim ha'olam omed. Al haTorah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al gemilot chasadim. Al haTorah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al gemilot chasadim. That means on three things the world stands: on Torah, on avodah, which is devotion, or actually specifically temple worship, or worship in general, service, and gemilut chasadim, deeds of kindness. And those are words attributed to Shimon HaTzadik as recorded in the Mishnah. Now, I just wonder, maybe just the show of hands, and I'm going to look through these screens real quick, who here knows what the Mishnah is or has studied Mishnah? Just raise your hand. I'm just trying to, okay, just trying to see. So some people, okay. So we're going to, oh, actually, I thought I would bring just some show and tell. This is a set of Mishnah, 3 volumes Mishnah, plus it happens to be the Mishnah is in the center, lots of commentary all around. But I just wanted you to get a sense that you can hold it all in your hand. This is an English translation, actually I think done by an Anglican priest, maybe even a century ago. One of the first translations into English. So we're going to actually get started pretty quickly because I have my notes pretty extensively laid out. And I also have it in print in case I can't see it. So Ira, will you start with the first page? Is it up and I'm not seeing it? Okay, well, so you tell me when it's up so I know that I'm just not seeing what I'm supposed to be seeing. Ah, I see something. Oops, wait. Right. Oh, I thought. Right. Okay. I want to get rid of it. Is that on mine or yours? Star files or something. Okay, so this is an idiosyncratic introduction to the Mishnah. It's idiosyncratic. So my idiosyncrasy is, I'm always asking myself, how can I derive guidance from a tradition I'm simultaneously challenging? How can I let tradition speak to me, and that's supposed to be to me and through me, so that I'm not simply dressing up what I already believe in Jewish clothes? So I think a lot about the texts and also about how they're organized and what questions are coming out of them. Often it seems to me that if we can take the text and look at what it is suggesting, go back underneath what it's saying to look at the question it's trying to answer, that's one way of being guided by the tradition, because you're being guided by the questions. Okay, so that's why it's idiosyncratic, is because after introducing the Mishnah, I go off on a tangent about how we might relate to it today. So if you'll, next page, please. Yeah, I'm not planning to spend a lot of time on each page most of the time, except so. Well, while we're working on that, let me go on to say that Mishna seems to mean that which is repeated. Can you hear me? Okay. Mishnah seems to mean that which is repeated. I mean, you can hear the word shana in there. Shana, year. So being repeated. You might also hear the word vishananthem. Like vishananthem levanecha, v'dibarta bam, b'shiftecha b'veitzecha, from the V'ahavta, after the Shema. You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, all of your soul, all of your might. These words which I command you this day shall be in your heart, and you shall repeat them to your children, or you shall teach them and teach them and teach them to your children. So Vishinantam Mishnah, that which is repeated. The Mishnah is a compilation of Jewish teachings and practices in the names of various rabbis and sages. It is probably initially an oral text. If you can go back, because that's still one page ahead of us, it probably is an oral text. Children still memorize the Mishnah in some places. I remember being a big brother to a 10-year-old many years ago in a neighborhood in Jerusalem. And he had a 7-year-old brother, and the 7-year-old brother came home from his school. No, you've gone the other direction. So, yeah. No, just stay there. I'll get there. Just stay there. I'll get there. No. So like I said, he had a 7-year-old brother, and the brother came home from school and he had memorized a couple chapters of Mishnah, just memorized it. And it's set up as a piece of literature. It's set up in a way you can tell that it has certain elements of repetition so that it can be memorized. It just feels that way. It is a collection. It is not a legal code. Not a legal code. And one way you know that is it has multiple different answers to the question, multiple different traditions. Some say this and some say that. Some rabbis did this, some rabbis did that. So it's not a code, it's a collection. It's from about the year 200 CE. It's a compilation from about the year 200 CE. And it's important to note that the temple was destroyed by the Romans in 70 CE. So after 70 CE, there no longer is a temple that the Jewish people is centering around. And then 60 years later, Jews stage another revolt against Rome, Bar Kokhba, it's 130 CE. It is a failure, and then Jews are even prohibited from being in Jerusalem. So the Mishnah then comes about some 70 years after that. So it's a post-temple period when there's a whole new set of authorities developing somehow. And there's been tremendous destruction and probably a lot of despair. And this is a way of re-establishing Jewish life on the part of at least certain Jewish authorities. So next page, no, here it is. This is the page we're on now. So the Mishnah was compiled around 200 CE, and it is attributed to Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi as the major person who brought it together. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Judah the Nasi. Nasi means either prince or leader. In modern Hebrew, it means president. Seems to have had a position of authority, maybe even with Roman permission. He may have had something to do with establishing some sort of theoretical order around which the Jewish people could be organized, given the lack of any civil power. And he's also known as Rabbi That's you. Rabbi Yehuda. The Mishnah is the core of both Talmuds. I say both Talmuds. There's more than one Talmud. There are two Talmuds. There's the Babylonian Talmud, which is the Mishnah, which is divided into pieces, and then the Gemara, this learning from the academies that developed out of the academies in Iraq, Babylonia, from 200 to 600 CE. There's also the Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, or the Palestinian Talmud, which is the Mishnah, and the Gemara from the academies of the land of Israel, around 200 to 400 CE. Next, please. Each order, here's how, now this is how it's organized. It's organized in six orders, 6 sections. And I showed you this 3-volume set. This 3-volume set. So each one actually is 2 orders. So that's why it's in 3 volumes. There's 2 orders in each set. Can you go back? Thank you. Yeah. So each order contains multiple tractates, Masechet, Masechtot in Hebrew. Each tractate contains multiple chapters, and each chapter contains multiple Mishnahs. It's not called verses. Mishnahs, you're back to Mishnah again. Now, each order, tractate, and chapter are organized associatively by topic, not logically, with an introduction, body, and summary necessarily, but by association, by topic. So as something also looks like it could be memorized. So now the next one. Nonetheless, the 20th century scholar, Jacob Neusner, who actually was, one of his claim to fame is that he wrote more books about Judaism than any single scholar in Jewish history. Jacob Neusner. Well, some people criticize that 90% of what he would write was something that he had written before. However, 10% revolutionized the field. So if 10% of your writings revolutionizes a field, I'll take that. But he suggested that there was a philosophical underpinning to the organization of the Mishnah and its function, which is what, and when I read that, it's what got me thinking about how the Mishnah could be used as a structure in spiritual life. So Jacob Neusner suggests, and here I'm paraphrasing, the message of the Mishnah is that everything in the universe is integrated, interconnected, united in a particular order. I don't know if you know, in the Middle Ages, they had this idea, the chain of being, everything was in a particular order, stacked on top of each other. Everything, all these different pieces are in a particular order. And the Mishnah seems to be ordering everything. It's putting everything into categories because it's all interconnected. So the method of the Mishnah is to establish a life pattern for the Jewish people that demonstrates this unity of everything and also testifies to the unity of God. The Mishnah begins, well, I'm getting a little ahead, but the Mishnah begins with the question, when do we say the Shema? You open it up and that's where it is. You just jump in. There's no introduction saying, explaining what this is about and then, what the assumptions are. And you just open it up and it says, when do you say the Shema? When I first learned it, that's how it was presented to me. It's like, no explanation, no reason. You just jump right in. And I think Neusner was suggesting, actually, there's a reason it starts that way, because the whole thing is about testifying to the unity of God and demonstrating the unity of the interconnection of everything, which is why it's all in order, and setting out a pattern by which the Jewish people lives so that the way we live actually testifies to the unity of God. So certainly the Mishnah is the core text, even though initially it was an oral text. It did exist as a text even before it was written. The Gemara actually says when they wanted to consult the Mishnah, at times they would call in a repeater. So the repeater would repeat the text. That's how the text was passed on for so long. There were specific people whose job it was to memorize the Mishnah. And it seems that it wasn't the scholars whose job it was to memorize the Mishnah necessarily, because they would be editing it in their mind. You wanted people who would just memorize it and then repeat it. So this is a text that was repeated, that which is repeated. Vishenantam livanecha, you shall repeat it to your children. And it's called the oral Torah. And it's important to recall that in that rabbinic Judaism is built on this idea of you have a written Torah and an oral Torah. A written Torah and an oral Torah. And they are basically interconnected. They're one and the same. It's all Torah. So that's why when you hear people saying, oh yeah, I know all about Judaism, I read the Old Testament all the time. Well, not only do we not call it the Old Testament, but I mean, they're missing the huge pieces. I mean, that's not how we're living, because they're missing the oral Torah. And I tell people there's two ways to understand the relationship between the written Torah and the oral Torah. Broadly speaking, there's more than two. But the traditional Jewish world thinks of it one way. The liberal Jewish world thinks of it as another way. But both of us accept that we've got written and oral Torah. The traditional world thinks of it more or less like Moses received the Torah in writing, but those were the notes to the lecture. And if you're taking notes for someone, you can't simply give your notes to the other person and say, well, here it is. You have to explain the notes. And that's part of what it means. And that's the oral Torah that comes down with it. Liberal Jews tend to think of Torah texts having developed out of the life of the people, maybe as a response to our experience with God, our response to our experience with godliness, divinity. So the oral Torah comes first, and then the written Torah develops out of that process, but they're still part of the same tradition. The Mishnah is the core text of the oral Torah, Torah Sheba'al Peh, and it's an important set of scripture beyond the biblical text, which is all too overlooked by Jews and is hardly known at all by most non-Jews, it seems. So let's go on, please. Next page. Okay, here are the 6 orders and the topics by association that they tend to deal with. Zra'im, seeds. That's what it's called, seeds. So it's agricultural laws in the land of Israel, also blessings and prayers. This is all generally speaking. Moed, festival seasons. Actually, festival season. It's actually Moed is the only one that's actually in the singular in terms of the name. So that's about Shabbat, festivals, and fasts. Nashim, which means women, and this text is definitely written from a male perspective. We don't have to like that, but I mean, there's no denying it. It's written from a male perspective. So the section about women is all about marriage, divorce, vows, some laws of sexuality, Nezikin, so actually family law, think of it as family law. Nezikin, damages. So this is civil law, this is business law, civil law, criminal laws, courts, judges, oaths, governance. Kodashim, which is holy things. So that's temple practices, sacrifices, offerings, shchita, slaughtering, and kashrut, since that also would have to do with sacrifices, but it also has to do with food. There's connections of this to a lot of practices that we have today, even though the specifics of this all have to do with the temple, which interestingly enough no longer hadn't existed for over 150, for almost 150 years by the time this was brought together. And the same with the next section, Tahorot, which is about purities, laws of purities and impurities of both people and things, because things can contract tuma, impurity, purities and impurities. It's like the tuma is like an obstacle to dealing with holiness. Being tahor means you're in a state to be able to engage in holiness, but it's not necessarily holy. You're ready. Mikvah is in there also, and washing hands. Some of the things as to like why you would wash your hands after leaving a cemetery or before eating. So next. So the next thing I want to do, I selected a Mishnah from each order, just as an example of what's going of what it is. And we only have time to get into a very little bit of it. There's a lot in the Mishnah, but I just wanted to give an example of a Mishnah from each order. And actually, at this point, I wanted to know if there was someone who would read. We're starting with Zra'im, seeds, Masechet Pe'ah, chapter 1, Mishnah 1. I was wondering if there was someone who would read this. Not too fast, doesn't have to be very slow, but certainly clearly. There's someone who might read this? Okay, I see Ronnie.
Seeds. These are the things that have no definite quantity, the corners of the field, first fruits, the offerings brought, on appearing at the temple on the 3 pilgrimage festivals, the performance of righteous deeds, and the study of the Torah. The following are the things for which a man enjoys the fruits in this world, while the principle remains for him in the world to come: honoring one's father and mother, the performance of righteous deeds, and the making of peace between a person and his friend. And the study of the Torah is equal to them all.
Right, the study of the Torah, keneged kulam, was equal or balances or corresponds to. So this might be familiar to a number of you. It's often in prayer books. A number of things. One, Zra'im, this section is mostly about agricultural laws. There is one section, Brachot, which is entirely about blessings and prayers. So blessings also, because some of the blessings are about food. And Pe'ah means corners. So it's all about the laws of what you have to leave for the poor. But I want you to see that it's already making connections beyond that. Not only about what you leave for the poor, and it talks about this, there's no measure, but it goes on just by association to say that there's other things that there's no measure for. So this is an important text, and also shows though how the Mishnah goes, brings more in than just the narrow thing that it's talking about at the moment. What's different about this, though, of course, is that it doesn't say Rabbi so-and-so said this and the sages said that, Rabbi so this is just making a blanket statement, but it's the opening of the tractate. Let's go to the next one. So that was about from the tractate dealing with blessings and agricultural laws. So this is Moed. This is about holidays and Shabbat season. So I chose Tractate Rosh Hashanah for obvious reasons. Tractate Rosh Hashanah, chapter 1, Mishnah 1. Would somebody read this?
There are 4 New Years.
And it actually says 4 Rosh Hashanah, 4 Rosh Hashanahs.
4 New Years.
Yeah.
The first of Nisan is the new year for kings and for festivals. The first of Elul is the new year for the tithe of beast. Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon say the first of Tishri. The first of Tishri is the new year for years, for Shemitah and Jubilee years, for planting and for tithe of vegetables. The first of Shevet is the new year for trees, according to the words of Beth Shalom.
Shammai.
Beth Hillel says on the 15th of that month.
Okay, thank you. Beit, by the way, means house. Beit Shammai. So does Beth, by the way. Beth Shalom. Base, Bait. Beth Shalom means house of peace. So it's the same word. And Shammai and Hillel are 2 different rabbis. But at the beginning, there are 4 New Years, 4 Rosh Hashanah, 4 New Years. That sounds strange, but not really, because if you think about the American calendar, we have a number of New Years. We have January 1st is New Year's for the years. September, Labor Day kind of is the New Year for the schools. July 1st is the New Year for the Pennsylvania fiscal year. October 1st, I think, is the New Year for a federal fiscal year. We'll probably be hearing about that soon. We are already hearing about that. So for different purposes. So the first of Nisan is the month that Passover is in. The Torah says this is the first month. So it's the New Year for kings and for festivals. When you're counting the festivals of the year, you'll notice in Jewish tradition, they usually start with Passover, because Passover is the first of the festivals. Passover is in the first month. Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the year, is actually in the 7th month. That's Tishrei. That's the beginning for years. Okay, but we're getting ahead there. The first of Elul is the month before what we know as Rosh Hashanah. It's the New Year for the tithing of beasts. So what's the age of your animal? The age of your animal. Well, what I imagine is that since a lot of animals are born in the spring, any animal that's born by the end of the summer, okay, that's its first year. Notice difference of opinions, but Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon say, well, it's different. And the Mishnah doesn't settle that, but the tradition accepts the first of Elul. Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon say the first of Tishrei, which happens to be what we know as Rosh Hashanah. The first of Tishrei, which has been all day today, is the New Year for years. So we count the years starting then. For Shemitah, that's sabbatical years and Jubilee years for planting. And the first of Shvat says the house of Shammai is the New Year for trees. But what does Hillel say? The house of Hillel says on the 15th of that month. And what do we call that? Tu B'Shvat. Tu B'Shvat, the 15th of Shvat, New Year of the trees. So again, this is all about this Masechet. This order is all about holidays and there's Psachim, and Yoma is about Yom Kippur, and there's one that deals a lot with Purim. There's one that deals a lot with Shavuot. Nothing that deals with Hanukkah, by the way, except in Masechet Shabbat. That's a whole other story. Hanukkah just isn't there, except when they're talking about lighting Shabbat candles, and they decided to talk about Hanukkah candles too. Several tractates about Shabbat, but it's about seasons, also fasts. So the next one, please. Okay. Now this one, we have no young people. No young people on this. Now this one we'll have to explain a bit maybe. But okay, kiddushin, which is what we call weddings, kind of marriage, sanctification. Kiddushin, chapter 1, Mishna 1. So will someone read this, please? If you're not too embarrassed.
A woman is acquired in 3 ways and acquires herself in 2. She is acquired by money, by document, or by intercourse. By money, Beit Shammai says, a denar or the equivalent of a denar. Beit Hillel says, a pruta or the equivalent of a pruta. And how much is a pruta? 1/8 of an Italian isar. And she acquires herself by divorce or by her husband's death. A yevama is acquired by intercourse, and she acquires herself by halitza or by yavam's death.
Okay, so let me start with just the last thing, get that out of the way. Yevama, that's if in the Torah it says if a brother, if a man dies childless, his brother marries his wife, unless they do chalitza, this spitting in the sandal. So that's what that is about, a yavama. Okay, so a lot of problematic things about this. First of all, I mean, this gets to the core, by the way, of what a lot of modern Jews object to in the way marriage is characterized in Jewish law, which is all about him acquiring her. It's all about acquisition. So, and which is why, by the way, the ketubah belongs to the bride. The ketubah is a very one-sided document. The ketubah is all about what the husband is obligated to, what the husband owes the wife. It's all about the wife's rights in this relationship because he is acquiring her, and so he also acquires obligations to her. And the ketubah becomes her bill of rights, which is a step towards protecting her in this very one-sided relationship of marriage. Of course, even in Western law, has been a very one-sided relationship. So today, in liberal circles, we depict and arrange marriage in a mutual way. When I perform a marriage, the ketubah belongs to both partners. Both are making commitments to each other. And this, of course, is a whole beginning of a discussion. And I didn't bring it so much to talk about all of these laws of marriage. Italian Isar, yeah, well, Roman maybe. I mean, I see the Italian Isar is anachronistic. We'll see other maybe anachronistic things. I'd like to go and look at the underlying Hebrew there. There's a lot here. We can't get into all of these things, but I want you to see what is in the examples of what is going on in the Mishnah and how it's working. Now, when it says she is acquired by money, by document, or by intercourse, and when you get into some of the more details from the Gemara, I mean, there's supposed to be witnesses to all of this. You'd think that this could begin to get a bit awkward. A traditional wedding ceremony, and even many liberal Jewish wedding ceremonies still are organized along those 3 principles. By something of value, by exchange of something of value. Well, that's the ring. The ring is something of value. And that's why Jewish wedding rings don't have a stone. I mean, if it's pure metal, you can pretty much know what the value is. The stone makes it very tricky. By document, well, that is the ketubah, the wedding contract. And by intercourse, there aren't witnesses to that per se, but after a wedding ceremony, after the chuppah, very often the bride and groom are escorted to a room and then the door is shut. and there are two witnesses placed outside, which is kind of, and they're there to say, no one went in, no one went out. I remember seeing the movie Dances with Wolves. They had a wedding ceremony there, which was kind of like that. The whole village just escorted the couple to the teepee. A dinar is of significant value, but a pruta is the smallest amount, the smallest coin possible. So what they're saying is, what Hillel is saying, and what Jewish law is, you don't have to use, it does not have to be a great value. The modern state of Israel, when they first became a state, the pruta was what they called the cent, dollars and cent. They had lira, I think it was lira, but they certainly had pruta as the smallest unit of money. Okay, that's. Can we go to the next one? Bava Metzia. This is from Tractate Nizikin, Damages. Who would read this, please? Nizikin is about civil law, business law, courts. So this is just an example.
I'll read it. If two people are grabbing a talit, one says, I found it, and the other says, I found it, or one says it's all mine, and the other says it's all mine, they each swear that they don't own less than half the talit, and they split the talit. One says it's all mine, and the other says it's half mine. The one who says it's all mine swears that he doesn't own less than 3/4. And the one who says it's half mine swears he doesn't own less than 1/4. And the former takes 3/4, and the latter takes 1/4.
So it's business law, or in this case, no, this is the law of lost and found. Lost and found. I saw it, I touched it, I saw it. You ever that argument? I saw it, I touched it, I saw it first, I touched it first. According to Jewish law, it's the one who grabs it and brings it to them is the owner. So it's I touched it first. I grabbed it first. I grabbed it and took it to me. And of course, this leaves out all the discussion in the Gemara about obligations to find the owner. You know, when are you obligated to find the owner, and how? But so they're not going into that right now. This is actually addressed to the judge, that two people come to him or come to the judge and say, and it's no longer a question of as to whether they need to return it. They can't find the owner or whatever, but both are saying they found it, which means they're both saying I own it. So the judge is instructed to have them take an oath. Now, an oath is really, really serious. One of the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain. That means you shall not take an oath by God's name. It's hugely huge. And a lot of people would simply back away altogether before taking the oath. But they're saying and you don't have two witnesses, which is what's necessary to establish something. So what this is saying is if they each will take an oath and say it's well, you don't want them to take a false oath. So they have to take an oath that they don't own less than half. You wouldn't want them both saying that I own it all. Otherwise, then someone's saying a false oath. So you have them say, I don't own less than half, and then they each get half or half the value. However, if one says, I touched it and grabbed it to me first, and the other says we did it at the same time, then they're both in agreement already that half of it belongs to the one person. So the only thing in dispute is the other half. So it's that second half that's going to be split. So yeah, and then they go, yeah. So let's go to the next one. Okay, holy things. Holy things. So Tamid, Mishnah, chapter 5, Mishnahs 1 and 2. Tamid means always, or yeah, like near Tamid, the eternal light. This is about the daily sacrifices. So would someone please read this?
The appointed leader said to them, bless, Baruch Hu, one blessing, and they blessed. Then they read the Ten Commandments, the Shema, and it will be if you hearken, the second paragraph of the Shema, and Vayomer, the third paragraph of the Shema. And they blessed the people with 3 blessings, Emet, V'yatziv, and Avodah, and the priestly benediction. On Shabbat they added, Mosfim, a blessing to be said by the watch which was leaving. He said to them, those who are new to the incense come and draw lots, and whoever won. He then said, new and old, come and draw lots to see who shall take up the limbs from the ascent to the altar. Rabbi Eliezer ben Jacob says, the one who brought the limbs onto the ascent also takes them up to the altar.
Okay, thank you. So this Masechet, this tractate, is talking about, it's actually describing, it's a little unusual because it's a lot of description. It is describing the rituals around the daily sacrifices. And a couple things. One, this Masechet, or this order, this whole order, Kodashim, which describes temple ritual, it's compiled, again, 140 years, 130 years after the destruction of the temple. So these are traditions about what was done. This is the memory of what was done. This is our record of what was done. And it's relevant because the Amida is the halachic equivalent of the sacrifices to this day. We have a morning Amida, which is about the mornings, which is equivalent to the morning sacrifices. We have the afternoon sacrifice was called Mincha. That's the afternoon service. The Amida is Avodah Shebalev, the worship, temple worship of the heart. And it's interesting to see that the tradition puts various different practices that are somewhat familiar to us into the middle of those daily sacrificial rituals, even saying Baruch Hu, the appointed leader is telling the group it's time to bless Baruch Hu. It's interesting that they put the 10 Commandments in before the Shema. The Talmud says that was a practice until a certain point when it was taken out because of the sectarians. That might have been Christians. We don't know. Okay, next, the final section of Mishnah. You were asking, Emily, about anachronistic things. The word Germani might be anachronistic. It might have been.
Not really. I was just thinking, after I said that, I was thinking, those were all in Italia was the Roman word.
Yeah.
Germania was a Roman word, so I guess it wasn't entirely anachronistic.
But this one's really interesting, though. Okay, this is about purities. Negaim. This is actually about skin. Like in the Torah talks about that skin blight. If you get this skin blight, and then you have to go to the priest, and the priest takes a look and diagnoses by, and then they're asking about how are things diagnosed, and by the color, and then you get to the question that different people have different colored skin. So look what it says here about that. Negaim, chapter 2, verse Mishnah 2. Will someone read that? Can I ask Emily, would you read that?
Sure.
Unless someone else was about to.
The bright spot in a German Germani appears as dull white, and the dull white spot in an Ethiopian, Kushi, appears as bright white. Rabbi Ishmael says, the children of Israel, may I be atonement for them, are like boxwood, neither black nor white, but of an intermediate shade. Rabbi Akiva says, painters have materials with which they portray figures in black, in white, and in an intermediate shade. Let therefore a paint of an intermediate shade be brought and applied around the outside of the nega, and it will then appear as on skin of intermediate shade. Rabbi Judah says, in determining the colors of negaim, the law is to be lenient and not stringent. Let therefore the negaim of the Germani be inspected on the color of his own body, so that the law is lenient, and let that of the Kushi be inspected as if it were on the intermediate shade, so that the law is also lenient. The sages say both are to be treated as if the nega was on the intermediate shade.
Oh, okay, so I don't want to get into all of the, I'm not an expert in the laws of negaim, but you can see though that it's talking a lot about how to diagnose things from the body.
Mm-hmm.
But also, the reason I included this, because this is fascinating. Rabbi Ishmael says, the children of Israel are like boxwood, neither black nor white, but of an intermediate shade. So you've got some, there's if you have white, this is like European and African, black, and the Jews are in between. And that's kind of the way we, in terms of, we still experience things socially, in terms of our social context. It's interesting to think about. I mean, and that's all I can say. But I mean, you can go and study Mishnah, by the way. Mishnah, it's all online. Go to Safaria.com. That's where this came from. Safaria.com. Okay, go on, please. Now we get to my idiosyncrasies. Why have I been thinking about this? Because for each of these orders, it seems to me that there's a suggested set of spiritual themes for today, and a suggested question posed to us, at least that I just stop and try to work through in terms of what it means to be a spiritual human being, what it means to be a Jew and a spiritual human being. So I'm starting with the last one first, Tahorot, purities, laws of purities and impurities. And to me, this suggests, I call it sacred frailty. What this whole order seems to be about, to me, now this is me, it's my idiosyncrasy, okay? But we are fragile, imperfect beings. We're subject to sickness and temptation and transgression. And these purities or impurities, the impurities adhere to us in this system because of illness, because of death, because of sinfulness. Kapara, Yom Kippur, kapara is actually like expiation. Like the altars get dirty because of the sins of the people and have to be clean, have to be purified. I mean, it's not talking about being scrubbed. I mean, it's like we do atonement for the altars. So this is all about our imperfection, our fragility. We are not perfect beings. So the question that this poses, and that I think we can learn from this for us today, is what is the best way to allow for and even raise up our human limitations, our physical limitations, emotional limitations, spiritual, intellectual limitations, as we live into our ideals. So this is about sickness, healing, visiting the sick, atonement, forgiveness, compassion, birth, death, mourning, life cycle. We're limited beings. What do we do with our limitations in order to live into our ideals as spiritual beings, spiritual and physical beings? Next, please. Kodashim, holy things, temple practices, sacrifices. This expects, suggests to me liturgy, prayers, sacred space, and also sacred narrative. The story we tell about ourselves, who we are, the construct that we carry with us, the philosophical word, like the mythic structure. I mean, this is the Mishnah is created 130 years after the temple, and they're describing this whole temple construct that we are living out even to this day. So I call this sacred architecture. It's the architecture of our space and the architecture of our narrative and the architecture of our symbol. Who are we? What is the best way to imagine our story as Jews, as we describe our ideals? We are a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So, and what does that mean? That's how we see ourselves, as a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. That's how the Torah describes us. So this is everything about study, prayer, and ritual. So this is because study, prayer, and ritual. Our study, prayer, and ritual grows out of our story, our narrative. Next. Nizikin, damages, business laws, civil laws, criminal laws. This is really about how do we structure our community and our society. This is about, so I call it sacred polity, community, governance, and economics. What is the best way to organize society in our community to reflect our social and economic ideals? Everything we think that we are about in terms of justice, tzedakah, human dignity, community, and the individual and community. The way we structure our community says a lot about who we are and what our ideals are. And it's an important question for us to be thinking about. So this is what Nizikin suggests. Next, please. Nashim, marriage and divorce laws. So this is, I call it sacred ambitions. This is about drives, appetites. I didn't use the word, I did use the word drives. Sexuality is a drive. Work, ambition, ambitions in the world. What is the best way to utilize our human urges, our ambitions and appetites to serve and honor our ideals? These types of things, sometimes they get all categorized as selfish. Right? So I say family, hunger, greed, fear, self-aggrandizement. But Judaism acknowledges that this is all part of us, and they're part of being human, not part of being evil. But we have to use it to work to motivate us to live towards holiness. What is the best way to utilize our human urges, ambitions, and appetites to serve and honor our ideals? And when I say ideals, I mean I can say to serve and honor Torah, to serve and honor God. Next, please. Moed, festivals, seasons, sacred seasons, structuring time. Rabbi Mita talked about time today. Well, how do we structure our time to tell our story and celebrate our ideals? Our festivals, our reenactments and memorials. And that's how do we structure that time, especially if we're not specifically halachic Jews. But what this lets us see is we are frail. We are frail human beings with a sacred narrative and symbols and human drives, and how do we structure our time and our ritual in order to celebrate all of this? Next. And this is the final one, or the first one, Zra'im, seeds. And this, to me, seems to be all about the interconnection of things. This is about agricultural laws in the land of Israel, which then has to do also about food. Food is about the conversion of physical energy, physical matter into spiritual energy. It's also about blessings are in here, blessings. The whole tractate on blessings. So it's about the interaction between inner life and outer life. It's about the interaction between us and the land and us in the world around us. It's about ecology, human ecology and environmental ecology, sacred ecology, interconnection of inner life and outer life. What is the best way to structure our impact on ourselves and every human and natural thing around us, physically and spiritually, to best reflect our ideals and teachings? I should have said sacred footprint. What is our footprint? Okay, we're almost done. I mean, so I'm aiming at 8 o'clock. Okay. Oh, so you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Go on, please. So by our ideals, I mean Torah, teaching, instruction, pointing God. I also want to mention Pirkei Avot, chapters of the Fathers. It's all known by all of this stuff. Chapters of the Fathers, ethics of the Fathers, sayings of the sages, lessons of the founders, because Avot also means categories. That's part of the Mishnah as well. So we have a whole collection of values written right there. Next. This is from Pirkei Avot. Moses received the Torah at Sinai and transmitted it to Joshua, Joshua to the elders to the prophets, and the prophets to the men of the great assembly. They said 3 things. Be patient in the administration of justice, raise many disciples, make a fence around the Torah. Shimon the righteous was one of the last men of the great assembly. He used to say, Al Shoshad Devarim Ha'olam Omed, on 3 things the world stands, on Torah, Avodah, Gemilut Chasadim. That's what I started with. A whole collection of values, statements, principles to live by. Mostly, there's some things that that I object to and you can object to, because the Mishnah is not a code; it's a collection. Shimon ben Gamliel talks about justice, truth, and peace. The next, please. So we're reaching the end now of it. So this basically, I took the first and the last words of the Mishnah as a summary of the whole thing. Brachot, which is blessings, 1, Mishnah 1, chapter 1. And it starts as this. From what time may one recite the Shema in the evening? Remember, the Shema is about proclaiming God's unity. From the time that the priests enter their houses in order to eat their truma, that which was donated, until the end of the first watch. These are the words of Rabbi Eliezer. But the sages say until midnight. Rabban Gamliel says until dawn. And then we have a story. Once it happened that his sons came home late from a wedding feast. The words mishtat looks more like a drinking feast. These are teenage sons. Think about it. His sons came home, a bit groggy. They said to him, we haven't said the Shema yet. And he said to them, if it's not yet dawn, you still have to say it. And not only about this, but every time it says until midnight, you can do it until dawn. So why did they say until dawn? So that you don't fall asleep. Or why do they say until midnight? So you don't fall asleep and wake up and you haven't done it. So, but this is about a discussion about saying the Shema in the evening. And the next one, I think, Rabbi Shimon this is the very end of the Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta said, the Holy Blessed One found no vessel that could contain blessing for Israel save that of peace. Shalom. As it is written, the Lord will give strength unto his people. The Lord will bless God's people with peace. You know that the Amida always ends with a blessing for shalom. And shalom, so I think it's very appropriate that the Mishnah does, or maybe it's the other way around. Shalom is an expression of unity. It's the peaceful coexistence, the harmonious coexistence of all parts of creation, of everything. Shalem means whole or complete. So it looks to me, if you go to the next one, the Mishnah begins with a discussion of Israel proclaiming the unity of God and concludes with referencing a search for a vessel that can actually contain God's blessing for Israel. Shalom, the peaceful coexistence of all things, is a proclamation of God's unity. Jewish life is about being a fragile vessel of shalom that proclaims God's unity. That's the conclusion of my idiosyncratic introduction. Jewish life is about being a fragile vessel of shalom that proclaims God's unity. Now go and study. So I hope this opens up a creative way to read the Mishnah. Because when you do read the Mishnah, it can just read like a collection. It's a collection, but there's so much going on in it. And I think a lot of it has to do with the structure itself. That's Neusner. I can't take credit for the Neusner. A lot of it has to do with the structure itself. So I will ask if there are any brief comments, anything anyone wants to say, and then my intention is that we'll say Kiddush. Basically, we're going to conclude by saying Kiddush and Havdalah, Motzi, apples and honey. I don't know if you can assemble it at home later too if you have, because we didn't really talk about that, but it seemed to me that it's something that should be done. So I put it all here. Any comments?
Thank you. That was very good. I enjoyed that. A lot I did not know.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Rabbi.
Okay. So I'm going to continue with, we'll say Kiddush, like I said, these various things. And then if there's anything else that occurs to anyone to say, we'll have another opportunity for that. And then that would conclude just about on time. So I'll be right here to say this here. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher karanu lavodato v'ramamanu b'kedushato v'kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'titem lanu Adonai Eloheinu b'ahava et yom hazikaron hazeh Yom Truah Mikra Kodesh Zecher L'Tziat Mitzrayim Ki Aleinu Karata V'Yotanu Kidashta L'Avodatecha D'Varcha Emet V'Kayam La'ad Baruch Atah Adonai Melech Al Kol Ha'aretz Mekadesh Yisrael Melech Al Kol Ha'aretz Mekadesh Yisrael Melech Al Kol Haaretz, Mekadesh Yisrael, Melech Al Kol Haaretz, Mekadesh Yisrael, Melech Al Kol Haaretz, Mekadesh Yisrael, V'yom HaZikaron. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam, Hamavdil Bein Kodesh Lechol, Bein Or Lechoshech, Bein Yom HaShvi L'Sheshet Yimei HaMaaseh, Bein Kedushat Shabbat L'Kedusha Yom Tov Hivdalta V'et Yom HaShvi M'Sheshet Yimei HaMaaseh Ki Kidashta Et Amcha Yisrael Kidashta B'Kedushatecha. Baruch atah Adonai Hamavdil Bein Kodesh Kodesh. Blessed are you, the many named our God, the sovereign of all worlds, who separates between holy and ordinary, light and dark, the 7th day and 6 days of work. You separated between Shabbat holiness and festival holiness. You set apart the 7th day from the 6 days of work, and you sanctified Israel with your holiness. Blessed are you, Adonai, who distinguishes between holiness and holiness. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lahazman hazeh. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who keeps us alive, sustains us, and allows us to reach this time. Notice Havdalah we're still in the holy time. It's just a different holy time. we have motzi. For those, maybe you've already said motzi, but I actually have two round loaves. I don't have I two very small round loaves. They're bread, not challah so much, but they're round. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam motzi lechem min haaretz. And if you haven't done this yet, I encourage you to do it afterwards. We must have a sweet new year. Apples and honey. Yehiratzon melefanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'Elahei avoteinu v'imotenu shetechadesh aleinu shana tova umtuka. May it be your will, source of life, our God and God of our ancestors, that you renew us for a good and sweet new year. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pri ha'etz. And I'm going to conclude once more with that song that I started with, and ask if there's any thoughts. Al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim ha'olam omed. Al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim ha'olam omed. Please continue, Rabbi Mita. Al
HaTorah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al gmilut chasadim.
Shaddai. Al
HaTorah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al gmilut chasadim.
Words of the Mishnah. On three things the world stands: on Torah, on Avodah, and Gemilut Chasadim. I would always use those to explain to B'nai Mitzvah, people studying, the kids that were studying for Bar Mitzvah with me. I'd always start with, what's a mitzvah? What type of mitzvot are there? And I would boil it down for them to three categories. There's Torah, which is teaching and learning and mitzvot of the head. Avodah, which is devotion and celebration, so it's mitzvot of the heart. And Gemilut Chasadim, deeds of kindness, which is mitzvot of the hands. And a balanced spiritual life, certainly for a 13-year-old, but actually for all of us, needs to have all three. The world stands on three things: on mitzvot of the head, mitzvot of the heart, and mitzvot of the hands. So the Mishnah is great for categorizing things and putting things in order. That's what they were trying to do. And that was Jenny's clock, right? That's good. So before we say Shana Tova, I'll ask if there's any more comments. I see Noah Levine on, and I'm very happy to see Noah. Noah has been so instrumental in helping to put together this network of communities. He works with the Jewish Community Legacy Project. And it's about reaching out to smaller Jewish communities around the country. And we ended up being the maybe by a couple weeks, the first group, the first regional group to start coming together. Is that correct, Noah? How did that all?
No, that's correct. And Lisa said that if there's one shining light of COVID, it's being able to bring us all together. I live in Marietta, Georgia, so I'm here with you in Central PA, but earlier today we zoomed into my daughter in Albuquerque while she read Torah. So we're all connected one to another. So, and thank you, Rabbi, and thank you, Rabbi Jarman, for this morning, and Rabbi Pardo tomorrow, and Rabbi Weiner and Mincha Yom Kippur.
Yes. Shana, so yes. Shana Tova, everyone.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova Tikatevu. May we all be inscribed for a good year.
Amen.
Thank you, Ira.
Thank you, Ira. Yes.
Oh my.
Thank you all.
Oh.
One pain in the ass, and I come to another pain in the ass.